We have a really great panel discussion about to start now, covering NIS2, Network Information Security version 2. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce our panel's moderator for today, René Matthiassen. He's the Senior IT OT Security Consultant for Frontdoor Security. And I'll let him introduce himself more and then introduce the panelists. So over to you, René.
Steve, thanks. Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. Today we're going to examine how the NIS2 directive impacts various industries and the responsibility it poses. We will also explore the requirements for stricter security measures, improve risk management, and much more. And with this, I have a very strong panel together with me on stage. I want to introduce, first of all, closest to me, David Hurtado. David, he's head of OT Cybersecurity and Cyberresilience in Naturgy, where he leads a definition on the cybersecurity strategy on the business, policies, and security architectures based on standards like IEC 62443 and senior management awareness, a lady with focus on the NIS2 directive. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much.
In the middle, we have Emil Bisgaard. Emil is a partner of law firm Paul Smith and advises clients on the legal aspect of cybersecurity and data security, including how to be compliant with NIS2, DORA, GDPR, and cybersecurity in contractual relations. Welcome.
Thank you.
And at the end, but not least, we have Alfonso Gonzalez Blasquez. Close enough?
Nothing.
Thank you. Responsible for business development efforts at Johnson Controls Security Products for Southwestern Europe, and has been working on products related to cybersecurity, communications, GIS, and mobility systems integration for more than 20 years. Yeah. Welcome to you, Alfonso, as well.
Thank you, René.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a panel discussion. I want you to be involved in this one. So if you have any kind of questions, just raise your hands, and I think we have someone around here that will run around with a microphone for the panels, and just to use them as much as possible while they're here with us. So I think I'll just kick off the session, if that's okay with you.
Please.
Let me find the right one here. So we can start off with talking about a little bit about accountability and responsibility when we're talking about NIS2 into the organizations. There is a difference between accountability and responsibility. David, in your organization and in your view, how do you see this split comes along in management? Mm-hmm. Do they understand what this is about?
Yeah, we understand definitely. And I think this is a very interesting question. When I was traveling here from Madrid in the high-speed train, I was reading the directive, and I was looking for the word CISO in the directive. I couldn't find the word CISO in the directive. No word CISO in the directive. So, of course, the companies need a CISO, and this CISO needs to define the strategy of the cybersecurity of the company. But at the end of the day, the business is what matters. And business is stated several times in the directive. If you look for business in the directive, the word appears several times. So the cybersecurity people have some kind of responsibility in the company to define the strategy, align to the company strategy and the business strategy, but the accountability of that security has to be of the business. And the directive also speaks about this. It talks about how the management bodies have to deal with the cybersecurity. They have to approve a plan, and they have to follow it up. And they are also, in this case, can be suspended if something goes wrong. So, of course, responsibility in some areas of the company, but accountability of the business and the managing directors of the companies, which I think it's a very different thing to the things that we saw previously.
Yeah, for the first version of
exactly.
NIS. Yeah.
The first version spoke a lot about the the CISO of the company, but in this case, no CISO and a lot of business.
But they do talk about top management in this version of the NIS2, right?
Correct.
And elaborating a little bit about top management, how do we define top management? What is top management? Is that the board of directors and the executive management team, or Emil, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I do, and I agree. There's no mentioning of the CISO in NIS2, and I think it's very much intent from EU side. A representative from the EU Commission actually stated at a sort of an informal conference my company took part in that with the NIS2, cybersecurity is moving into the boardroom. So that's basically the message. The accountability for the security of all the entities under NIS2 are the responsibility and the accountability is at the board of directors. They can delegate, of course, but they cannot delegate the accountability. And I do think, and this is subject to sort of a legal discussion at the moment, that there are some limitations as to how much they can actually delegate. I think that there are legal implications of the NIS2 directive that the board of directors will need to have a little bit more insight in the actual analysis. They have to look into the risk analysis that supports the choice of security measures and approve the coherence between the risk analysis and the measures. And that exercise, I believe that in general, many companies have put down at the CISO level. That is not something for the board. But I think they will need to look a little bit deeper into that, and there are signs of this both in the actual wording, but also in other requirements of the directive, because by now by NIS2 and DORA and the other regulations, the board and the C-level has to be educated and trained in cybersecurity to be able to understand cyber risk and the implications for the company. And there wouldn't really be any reason for having that education if you wasn't going to apply it. That's not the strongest legal argument, but sort of a straight argument on what we are now expecting from top management.
So it sounds like there needs to be some sort of an education, a further education for the management compared to the first version of NIS. Alfonso, what would you say? What drives the implementation of the NIS in your company, as you see it?
Yes, well, I think that following the conversation about how the involvement of the full company in our company is the cybersecurity, the CISO is cross to all the divisions of the company. So now is the time not only for the CISOs, it's the time for all the divisions of the company. So in the moment that this responsibility or accountability is on hands on the C-level, this forced all the divisions of the company to collaborate in being cyber secure. So in our case, yes, we have a specific department for cybersecurity that is horizontal, that is cross to all the divisions. We are talking also not also to the cybersecurity of our infrastructure, our systems, and so on, but also the cybersecurity that is in our products, in the solutions that we sell and that we provide. So it's for the system we have, the information that we protect, and also the product that we deliver. And this is important because it's cross to all the company.
Yeah, and I can imagine that for a European-based company, maybe it's difficult to understand the NIS2 and interpret the NIS2 anyway, but for a global company like the one you're representing, how do that go across the Atlantic, so to say, when you have operations overseas and outside of Europe?
Well, at the end, you have to be the best in both sides. So you have to be compliant with regulations in both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. But
do the Americans understand it?
Yes. But in some cases, you can find standard certifications, regulations that are interesting or that are good at the other side, and in other cases, we find that regulations here. So it's challenging, so we need to be at both sides. But at the end, I think that is complementary in many cases. So well, it's the challenge, I think, of a global company, of course.
David, in terms of the entities that are applicable to the NIS2 directive, would you have any idea how far they are in implementing or complying to the requirements? Have they started, or are they just about to start, or are they in denial?
I don't think many of them are in denial, because it's a topic that is very trendy. But the directive says that the main goal or the main objective is to have a high common level. So, and also the directive says that there are two different types of entities, important and essential entities. So from my point of view, what are essential entities, big companies like my company or some others, we are working in a certain way since many times. So we are concerned about the directive. We have been working in that direction for some time, so we are confident that we will get to a very good point with it, and it will be very good for us. But let's talk about the important entities, which maybe there are smaller companies. They don't have this big budget for cybersecurity. They don't have access to a lot of resources of partners that can help. So in this case, some of them maybe have not heard about the directive, which is an issue. And in some cases, the access to resources to comply with the directive can be more difficult for them. So these are the companies that maybe are going to have more difficult to comply with the directive, and they will have to work stronger to comply with it.
Yeah, exactly. So you have smaller companies which has applicabilities to the directive anyway, but it doesn't necessarily have the competences. That's the point here.
Exactly.
Right.
And
Do you have a suggestion for them?
it happened the same with some other issues like health and safety or environmental. It's the same. I'm old enough to live in a world with no environmental issues, but from some moment on, all the companies have to work with environmental policies, and all the companies have to comply with. So it will be the same here. So cybersecurity will have to be taken into account. Some companies are more prepared, some other companies are less prepared, and the regulation is for all of them, no doubt.
Yeah. From a technical perspective, the security requirement, they seems to be quite high when you look at them. What does that exactly mean to an organization who are covered by NIS2? I mean, if they don't have if they cannot fulfill the requirements?
If they don't can fulfill.
Yeah. What are the sanctions? I mean,
there are sanctions specified in directive. I don't know if you guys know the text of the directive, but there are some sanctions for the important companies and some sanctions for the essential companies. If I remember correctly, it's about 2% of the annual turnover for the essential and 1.4 for the important companies of the annual turnover, which is a lot, or 10 million or 7 million euros, which is higher. And also there are some kind of suspensions for what the directive call management bodies. So the management bodies of the companies can be suspended if they don't fulfill the requirements of the directive. And this means that the CEO of the company, of the legal representative of the company, can be suspended from his functions. So it's
Heavy
a big issue.
fines.
Yeah?
Heavy fines, Emil, in terms of national implementation of the NIS in Denmark, for example, how do you see this? How do you see this go? What is the progress there?
Yeah, NIS 2 is what's called a directive in EU. So it's the form of legislation that actually has to be implemented in the national laws of the member states. That's different compared to GDPR, which is a regulation that has direct effect in each member state. So that means that you have to make national laws. And in Denmark, we have a long tradition of making sector-specific regulations in various cases, and that's it. That principle is applied was applied on NIS 1 and is also applied on NIS 2. So it actually means that we make a lot of different sector-specific NIS 2 implementation laws in Denmark. Under NIS 1, it wasn't that big of an issue because it was relevant to very few entities in Denmark, and it was clearly separated entities. NIS 2 is much wider. It has a much wider scope, and also it begins to affect entities that are crossing across sectors. In Denmark, it actually means that if you are unfortunate, you will be subject to 2 or 3 or even 4 different national implementation variations of NIS 2. And that's obviously something that sort of adds complexity and adds to the resource and administrative burden of documenting compliance and actually being in compliance with the regulation. Adding to that, NIS 2 being a directive also means that if you are a company that works across member state boundaries, borders, then you will actually also need to comply with for instance, the German and the French and the Italian and the Spanish version of NIS 2. And if they have a sector principle like we have in Denmark, then you may be subject to different sector-specific regulations in each member state. I haven't looked into how each member state does it, but I know it's not all that do it the way we do in Denmark. But I know that many worry in Denmark that they are going to comply with many different versions of NIS 2 in Denmark and across the EU.
Mm-hmm. So if you're really unlucky, you can have an audit twice a week.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Or lucky, that depends how prepared you are. Talking about the proportionate principle in the directive, can you elaborate a little bit about that, around that? What does it mean? I mean, the cost of implementation and so on?
Yeah, well, NIS 2 is the kind of regulation that is actually, in a way, flexible and dynamic. It applies the proportionate principle, which is quite common across EU legislation, and also allows actually give a legal basis for the entities to take into account the implementation cost. Meaning that if you are a small company and it will be very costly to make a certain security measure, then you can actually use the cost as an argument for not doing it. However, I would sort of emphasize that you should really consider what your explanation are if you choose to not implement something that seems to be sort of basic cyber hygiene. The more basic it is, the better your explanation has to be, and the more worried I would be using cost as the actual explanation for not implementing. Also, implementation cost is one thing. The size of the company is another. But what NIS 2 also introduces is that the companies have to take into account the risk to society when they consider what kind of measures are proportionate. This is sort of in contrast, or at least different from what most companies are used to when they work with, for instance, ISO 27001. When you do risk assessments under ISO 27001, most companies would take into account the risk of the company. For instance, the risks for the revenue, or for the result, or for the brand, or in other ways for the employees, but something that has to do with the company. When the GDPR arrived, companies all of a sudden had to start learning how to make risk assessment that took into account the risk for the individuals for which they were processing personal data. And that was a very difficult and sort of abstract and to some companies sort of unreasonable exercise that they had to do. But nevertheless, that was the actual requirement. They had to consider the risk for the individual. What would happen if we sort of leaked their information about their union or religion or health information and something like that. So it's the same principle, but now exchange the individual with society. What will the consequences be if our service, the service like heating or water, electricity, health, transport, internet, domain, food supply, government services, some of all the sectors that are covered by NIS 2, what are the implications for society if our service is not available for a given period of time? That sort of consequence has to be part of the risk assessment. And the bigger consequence to society, the more difficult it will be to use cost as the argument that you didn't do anything.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how many companies are going to use that as an excuse for not being ready or not implementing this one. Alfonso, according to the incident management and communication requirement, can we consider that dedicated private cybersecurity incident response team have to be established in the companies?
Yes, for sure, and this is a requirement from the directive. So this is something that every company needs to manage in some way. Maybe in some cases with its own team, with its own department for emergency response, and in some cases maybe with outsourcing this service to another company. But now this is another important, I think that one of the most important topics or aspects of the directive, that is the need to communicate, well, firstly to manage properly the vulnerabilities and all the issues. This is very important. There are specifications of ways to do that in the right way, and later on to communicate to the proper authorities about any issue that may happen. Nowadays, sometimes is not seen as so positive, the communication of vulnerabilities. So sometimes someone is disclosing a vulnerability in a product, and people say, hey, this company has a vulnerability. Okay, yes. No, it's disclosing this because there is a previous process behind that is taking control over the vulnerability, and to communicate this is the way to do things. So I think this is very important, and to consider that to be open and to be transparent is the way to manage much better the cybersecurity and the processes to manage this incident management, emergency response, vulnerabilities management, and so on are already there. And I think it's one of the main things, positive things of the directive from my point of view.
Yeah, and the transparency and the openness is what we also see in other acts and other regulations these days coming out for the financial institution, DORA, for example. So we want to be prepared before the incident happens or reach us. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that leads to the next natural question, I would say, in terms of getting the resources. Do we have available resources to set up cybersecurity and response teams in?
Well, yes, it's a challenge for small, medium companies now, because they are affected. Maybe they are not affected directly, affected by the directive, but in the moment they are provider of a big company, they have to, they need to manage this accordingly, and because they need to be aligned with the customers. So it's I think obviously for the small medium companies this is going to be a challenge, and takes resources. It's not only to notify or something like that. There is a process. There are some procedures. So it's a complete thing to manage all these things, and it's going to be a challenge, as David mentioned before, for the small companies that are working for large companies. Yeah.
So we have a business opportunity, the two of us here.
Yeah.
Start off with. That's what you're saying. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Let's talk about that afterwards.
You
Dave-
send me your rates.
Yeah,
maybe I'll
absolutely.
contract.
Of course, sure. Yeah. David, I wanna move into to the supply chain risk, and how we can incorporate that maybe even more further into our companies. How do you see this? Or maybe I should rephrase the question. The question is more, how do I get started with this? Because I have maybe 200 suppliers in every areas of my critical services. What do I do?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because the directive also mentioned the supply chain several times. So, and if we take into account that there will be a lot of companies that have to comply with the directive, and the regulator has to look to those companies, the regulator doesn't want to look after the whole supply chain. So they expect me as a final company to look after the whole supply chain. So it's a very important issue. So first of all, what you have to know is your business, which is your core business, which are your core contractors, which are the contract, the services that if they have some kind of problem, they're going to impact the service that you provide to society. And these are the ones that you have to look after very carefully. What we do in our company, we implemented a system in which we, in each contract we provide cybersecurity conditions or cybersecurity clauses for the contract. We select some contracts each year, and we make some kind of audits for those contracts, and we created some kind of tiers for the different contractors. So we classified the different contractors, very important contractors, medium, and smaller, and depending on those, we implement different cybersecurity conditions. We implement different kind of audits, but the steps that you have to take up, which I recommend, first of all, know your business, know your contracts. Focus on which is important to you as a company, and focus on these cases in which the contract can be a risk to your company. First, you have to take this into account and put your focus and your efforts in these kind of contracts. The rest comes easily, but you have to focus, because there are lots of suppliers. In our company, we have lots of them.
Yeah.
So we try to do our best.
Yeah.
We try to provide clauses for everything, but we have to do samples
Yeah.
of audits about the most important ones. And each company is different. Maybe what works in my company, it doesn't work in some other company. You have to know your business, and you have to apply what is best for you.
Emil is a lawyer, so he will make it work. That's what he's do in his company.
Exactly.
Emil, you have been involved with a lot of requirements and contract negotiations over the years, and especially when we're talking about cybersecurity, compliance, audits in contracts. What's your vision on how should companies approach this one? Is it just as David says, rank your suppliers based on the criticality and then put selected requirements?
I agree with the general concepts. I think we have quite a similar approach in Denmark. I have for the last 10 years assisted a lot of especially governmental agencies in big public procurement procedures, and we have seen and been part of a big development, and this is sort of independent from NIS 2 and NIS 1 and GDPR actually, but government agencies realizing that they actually needed to make security requirements towards their suppliers. When we started, it was actually based on a big and very public incident in Denmark involving the police mainframe and a Swedish hacker. And the contract regulation was very limited, and that was following a few years where we have tried as legal advisors to sort of get involved in the security regulation of the big governmental contracts. But each time the security guys, René said that, not René personally, but security guys said, this is not something for the lawyers, you need to stay out of this, we got it. And we respected that because we actually believed it. But it turns out that it was quite difficult to sort of make the good security ideas that the tech guys were able to think of, make that work in a legal context of a contract. So following that incident, we realized that we actually needed to sort of move the chairs together with the tech guys and sort of develop security requirement specifications that were based on the input from the tech guys, but sort of mediated by the legal guys into a contract form that would actually be possible to enforce on the supplier and would sort of stand the test of time also, because some of these contracts are quite long, so you have to think in the time as well. And at that point in time, we were kind of free. We could make the requirements that the tech guys would recommend us to do, and we found good solutions for that. But then came along the regulation and the minimum requirements of for instance, NIS 2. So now we are looking into how, to what extent are we going to reflect the minimum requirements from NIS 2 on suppliers that are not NIS 2 covered themselves. Do we need to take them all, or can we sort of just take some of them out of from a proportionate or relevance assessment, and how do we actually make the legal argument for that? Because that's what we actually need to do, but we also do legal advice, so we need to have the legal argument in place to do it. And that's about the contracts, and then we have the internal processes, because I think David mentioned something that is more difficult than you would actually think. How to keep the inventory of all your contracts and all your suppliers, and how to select the contracts and suppliers that you need to take into this consideration and make these requirements that we are able to make. But how do you identify it in a way that where you keep identifying those contracts, going along with your company, which are moving ahead all the time and making new contracts and new contracts and new contracts. You have to sort of click into the processes that are already there in the company, and not interrupt the process, but just jump on the process with the legal requirements. And that's something that we are looking into right now, sort of integrating NIS 2 compliance for supply chain security in the supply chain work as it is.
Yeah, definitely a trick, a little inside left, as I understand it, for sure. Alfonso, you talked a little bit just before about certifications for the products, software bill of material, hardware bill of material. What is your take on standardization for like common criteria, or the 62443, or some other standards for your products to ensure compliance to the standard?
Well, obviously, NIS 2 is a framework. It's a good framework to work with, and well, it's defining clear statements. So, well, it's a way to say Okay, we are compliant with NIS2, but there is a lot of work to do, not only at each country, but talking about some kind of specifications or clear requirement about some concepts that can be, let's say, quite open. When we are talking about encryption, what kind of encryption is good or not good? This is a concept that can be a bit open. So I think that we had the framework, and now I think it's only the beginning of the story, and we will need more and more regulations or more specifications how to be compliant with that. For the data protection, GDPR, ISO 27001, or the ISA is a secure and so on, I think that they are really good for be compliant as a beginning for be compliant with NIS2. I think that they are good, really good regulations. Mainly because we are talking about the full life cycle of the solutions and the products, and this is another change in the regulation. That now we are not talking only about specifications or technical specs in the moment of the delivery date. We are talking about that we need to take into account the full life cycle of a solution, not only the delivery date, but maybe later on, and the relationship with the customers. I'm talking as a supplier, let's say, technology supplier, has to go beyond that day, because all the vulnerabilities management and so on is beyond the delivery date. So those regulations are, I think, that are really a good beginning for be compliant with NIS2. But ENISA has a lot of work to do now, starting right now, and this is going to be, as I mentioned before, only the beginning of the story.
Right, from the product perspective, sure. So talking about physical security in relation to NIS, is that of importance?
It's there. It's in the directive. It's mentioned in the directive, and obviously, my principal domain is the physical security.
Oh.
And so it's key, and it's one of the verticals of my company also. And yes, because without the physical security, the cybersecurity is, let's say, is useless. So well, indeed, nowadays we are many companies are merging both departments. Until now, we had in the past the physical security management and the cyber and the CISO, and now this is merging in only one person that manage all the security in terms of physical or cyber, because is related, fully related to one with the other. So it's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. So an open question to all of you, or all of you over there. We're talking about the burden or the challenge with implementing or complying to NIS2. Could this be changed a little bit around to also be a competitive advantage? Would you say, for a company, for compliance? Could we get new customers? Is there anything we could spin it around, or we could turn it around so it would more be a project against getting a competitive advantage instead of having just to comply for the compliance sake?
I think it could be a competitive advantage, because society starts to think about these issues, and all the different ESG summaries in the companies, sometimes they include cybersecurity on it. For example, we include some KPIs of cybersecurity, and we put this on the table. Yeah. So I think that the society, when they buy a product or when they buy a service, they take into account a company that is environmental compliant, cybersecurity compliant, etc. So I think it could be an advantage, definitely.
A little bit like the CE mark on products, perhaps, as it is.
Yeah, I agree. It could be an advantage, but I also wonder if perhaps, and that's not the most encouraging thought, but that it could also just be sort of the new normal, the new sort of basic, just ticket to be in the race, basically. This is just something that all
to operate.
License to operate, exactly. It's just something that all companies need to do, and if you don't do it already, then that's actually why EU is making these rules. They don't ask companies that are already good at cybersecurity to implement basic cyber hygiene, which is a minimum requirement of NIS2. They actually wanna get to all the companies that don't already have basic cyber hygiene, and it seems maybe a little bit arrogant to think that why wouldn't everyone have basic cyber hygiene? But I guess we can conclude that EU has found out that it's not everyone who has basic cyber hygiene. Definitely. So now we need to make it into legislation, and we need to also add big fines and top management accountability and suspension possibilities and so on, just to get people to have basic cyber hygiene. So that, I think that's sort of the reality. I think the competitive advantage is probably now at this point. The ones who in a short term will be able to document that we are already NIS2 compliant, and we can help you become NIS2 compliant. If you find it difficult, then we can deliver you a service that lifts part of your task by supplying documentation for the services that you use for your NIS2 service. I think that's where the competition is right now, and then it will go into operation at some point, like GDPR is, I guess, starting to do.
Yeah, I will just say to the audience, we're open for questions. So if anyone has a question, just raise your hands, and we have a microphone going somewhere. Until I'll just keep asking the questions for the panel here. Article 21 talks about the minimum requirements, technical requirements. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a question a little bit later, because we have one from the audience who will ask you first. Go ahead, please. Yeah. Please state your name and your company, if it works.
Now it's working. Gabriel Pfeifman, Schneider Electric. I have a question mostly maybe to the asset owner spectrum of the audience, because I can hear that, of course, NIS2 is going to require an effort. You need to identify the contracts, you need to identify providers, but accountability, that is the first point that you talk about, means that now the asset owners are taking not only the responsibility to do it, but also they are more accountable, and it could be a way of saving money, basically, a way of saving money, not paying fines to have a good cybersecurity program. So my question is, do you think that applying specific standards, as you name, or demanding that as part of your procurement policy, how do you see that part being used in order to accelerate your compliance with NIS2?
Correct. This is what we actually do. When we create a request for proposal for everything, we introduce in that request for proposal, besides the functional requirements, some cybersecurity requirements. In some cases, we provide some requirements in order to the project or the product be compliant with, for example,
443.
Exactly, that one. For industrial cybersecurity and all kind of things. Because we understand, as you said, that we are accountable for the service we are providing to society. So we want all the project the engineering, the integrator, and the product to be taking cybersecurity by design. So we do two different things. First, we introduce some kind of requirements in the contracts, and we introduce requirements in the project, which is different. And we assure that when we are accepting the project into production, we have some kind of acceptance test of cybersecurity too. We are starting to do this, and we are taking baby steps, to be honest. But this is the way we understand, because at the end of the day, we will be accountable for the service. So the whole chain has to be secure, and we have to ask for the different security conditions. I don't know if I asked your question.
So yeah, absolutely. And so you're doing that for the solution, that means for the products and for the services that you're acquiring.
Exactly, for the project.
You're mandating 62443. That's good news.
And we have in our case, we have technical architectures for the main assets of the company. Let's suppose the thermal power plant. Let's suppose a substation, whatever you imagine. So we defined some years ago, 5 years ago, the different architectures, security architectures that we have to follow. This is the base of everything. And then we have the projects that have to have specific conditions, security conditions, but have to comply with this big picture of architecture.
Thank you. And you think that there is collaboration that needs to be create a consortia or create a way that facilitates the relationship between asset owners and providers to that?
That's a very good question, because some years ago, me as an asset owner didn't find many, common understanding between both parts, right? But years later, I'm finding that we start to talk the same language. We start to speak the same language. And it's much more easier to find common ground. You know what I mean? Right? So I think we are a step forward, definitely, that we were years ago. When I talk to companies like yours or some other of your competitors, we find agreement quite easily, or at least easier than years ago. Mm-hmm.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
Yes, definitely.
So the market has somehow matured. That's what your point is.
Baby steps.
Yeah.
But
in the right direction, though.
The direction is very good. I find a lot of differences between years ago and nowadays, definitely.
Yeah, for the better.
Yeah, for the better.
For the better, okay. I want to dwell into the Article 21 in the NIS Directive. This is about the, I believe, 10 minimum requirement, although everything is minimum requirement. There are some requirements which are quite technical. As you were saying, Emil, you need to have multi-factor authentication solutions. There are some requirements which are more procedural. You need to have a process in place for something, business continuity, for example. All of you, in your views, are there any starting and stop or any depending activities you should start with before the other ones? Are there anything that, or should you just take the ones which is the easiest for you to comply to?
I think this is personal and depends on the company and the stage of the company, honestly. But for example, in our case, which is a mature company, sometimes I think we have to put more focus in the basic hygiene, like he said. This is basic. And sometimes we like to think about the big threat hunting things and all those stuff, and sometimes we forget the basic hygiene. To me, this is the most important. And the second most important for me is the business continuity. At the end of the day, which is important is business continuity. Doesn't matter anything else. So the business has to have a continuity plan in case you have an incident, and the business has to continue, maybe in not the perfect conditions, but it has to continue in some kind of conditions. And the technical guys have to have their recovery plans and all that. So for me, the basic hygiene and the business continuity, in my particular opinion, is the most important things.
And basic hygiene, that's a kind of at least in my head, a little bit difficult to grab or to grasp. Is that something
You
about...
always find little holes along the way.
Yeah. But about education and awareness training and so we can raise the bar for knowledge.
Yeah. This is something that we work every day at all the different levels, from the C-level, from the board. Our CISO goes to the board and do training to the board in cybersecurity from the point of their personal lives and from the point of the company, of employees of the company. And we do training to the whole company.
On all levels?
All levels,
yeah.
all levels, yeah. All levels. And that's important because when you do a lot of training and do a lot of awareness, you see how the company starts to have some kind of common, let's call it culture or something like that, right? And we start to speak the same language. So it's very important.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, actually, I think that's a requirement, if I remember correct, that cybersecurity awareness, training, and risk management should be on different levels.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience, but let me just add just one thing. I think one thing that sort of is the basis for most of the minimum requirement of NIS2 is the asset inventory. If you don't know your assets, if you don't know your assets that are relevant to your NIS2 activities, many of the other requirements are actually difficult to make in an actual appropriate way. You can't make risk assessments, you can't make vulnerability management or crisis management or any of that if you don't know your assets. And it seems very basic, but it also seems like it's actually very, very difficult for many companies to get that asset inventory done. So whenever people say to me, we want to start working with NIS2, but we have to sort of get our internal stuff in place before we get you in, I say, okay, but start by making your asset inventory, and then we can talk afterwards. But you're gonna need to do that.
You can't. And then they call you back in 2 hours, 2 years afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question is down here in the middle.
Yes, please.
Basically, my question: Ivan Kravchenko, Corvus of GmbH, technology company from Germany. So my question relates to what you just right now told.
Oh.
Yeah, so basically we are providing software for physical security manufacturers who cater critical infrastructures.
Okay.
So it's like up the supply chain.
Yeah.
And what we often see is that companies, so the security manufacturers, are asking us, what do I do now with NIS2? Can you supply us the software that is NIS2 compliant? And that's exactly the thing, yeah? So it's very customer specific and asset specific. How do we act in this way? So we have to provide the general technology for companies who cover multiple critical infrastructures. Is there something common as a common denominator to be NIS2 compliant in terms of software technology?
I think that is one of the quite difficult questions on NIS2. First of all, I think that you should probably on your own try to figure out if you are also subject to NIS2 in some way, because more IT suppliers than you would actually think are themselves subject to the obligations of NIS2.
That was my question number 2.
Okay, so I'm sort of doing your questions backwards and forwards, and so you should look into that. Seek legal assistance, perhaps.
Do you know anyone?
No,
Can you recommend anyone?
we talk afterwards, but so that's one thing. But then I think you need to look into how you are able as a software company to document that your product are secure. And it's because that is what the NIS2 entities will need. They have a minimum requirement. They actually probably have 2 minimum requirements at least that crosses into to your requirement or to your product. They have the supply chain security requirement, and they have the security in acquisition of net and information systems requirements, and that could be cover what you are supplying for them. And then also on top of that, they have the requirements for an all-hazard approach in NIS2, which could also be part of that. So I think you need to find out how you are able to document that your product is developed in a secure way, that it is put into the market without known vulnerabilities, and that you will keep it secure for the life cycle of the product. And that is something that NIS2 entities need to look into when they buy products like your product. But in just a few years, the Cyberesilience Act that will come in 2027, and then it will most likely be a law requirement directly on your company that you are able to document that kind of security. So you will just be a few years ahead of time on that end.
Basically, we were doing this where other regulations like BSI from German Ministry. I will not pronounce this word. No one will understand it in German. But basically, there are these common practices for documenting the transitive dependencies of your software, making your supply chain transparent.
That could be a good starting point. Maybe even enough. I think it's important to know that EU is not really trying to sort of invent the wheel or anything. They want to keep companies working by commonly accepted standards. The problem is that there are many companies that doesn't do it at this point. Use standards or frameworks. The companies that do so already, they are probably in a good spot towards getting NIS2 compliance.
But for example, what I see is missing. Sorry, so the last question.
Sure.
For example, for ISO 27001, so there is a clear process for being certified. Yeah.
Yep.
For NIS2, I haven't seen that yet. So,
no.
What is the way?
And I'm not sure what kind of certifications will come, but there will be a certification for products with digital elements. It's the EU common criteria, which is based on the common criteria that is already in place, is something that perhaps could be relevant for your products. I don't know your company that well, but the NISA will develop more certification schemes in the years to come, leading up to the Cyberesilience Act in 2027. Alonso?
Yes, well, from the point of view of a manufacturer, technology provider, we are always looking for standards to say, okay, I'm compliant with this directive or this other and so on. This is something that we don't have with NIS2 at today. There is another challenge with the standard because sometimes the technology goes faster than the regulations and the directive. So sometimes there is a new directive standard and the technology is 3 steps beyond. So it's difficult. I think that in this case, the approach from David is good because there are some minimums in the contracts, and it's the company who decides some specifications depends on the goal of the system, the solution, the service, whatever. So the companies need to define their own standards in their own specifications in some cases because we don't have it. Maybe in some vertical we can find a specific requirement or something like that, but probably it's going to be a job for the companies to define well, we have a minimum requirement, but to define specific requirements according to the NIS2 in general.
Yes, that is true. but our job would be, and our life would be much more easier if we would have something to rely on, like Cyber-Resilient Act. So when we have this Cyber-Resilient Act and this kind of stamp or and something, this would be the first line on our contracting conditions.
Obviously, yes. Yeah.
Definitely.
So what you're saying, we are in for a treat for the coming years when the Cyber Resilience Act comes and all the good things come to those who wait, as we say.
It will be easier.
It will be easier. Okay. I want to thank each and every one of you for taking your time from your busy schedule to join us here in Barcelona. I want to thank the audience for your questions, for your participation, and conclude this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, René.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.